Hi, good afternoon. I'm Mike. You're now listening to Compact Sector Series webinar preview. In this series, we're going to talk about Hong Kong's new minimum wage and the 468 rule. We spent about 25 minutes to deep dive on the topic for JLE candidates to illustrate on labor policy reform, statutory employment protections, and interview-ready policy analysis. The program will be delivered in English. So companions, facts are the entry fee. Analysis is the price for admission to the top tier. So let's start this series. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike from IRB, of course. As mentioned just now, we're going to talk about the minimum wage arrangement effective on the 1st of May 2026. In this review, we will talk about mainly Hong Kong's case. But in the 16th of May 2026, that compact sector seminar, we'll talk about the practices in the other 11 other jurisdictions. So we first build up what the local case is, and then we do the comparison on the 16th. Hope it helps you in preparing the questions for labor policies. But before we begin, let me ask you two questions. Yes, these two. Question one, what is the current statutory minimum wage in Hong Kong now, not last year? Not an estimate, not a rough approximation, but an exact rate. Do you have that idea in mind? Question two, how many hours must a part-time employee work within a 4-week period before they can be classified as a continuously employed worker, entitled to full statutory protections, including holiday pay, sick allowance, and MPF contributions? Don't search up, don't check your notes, just think. If you hesitated even for 1 second, that hesitation is precisely the knowledge gap we are here to close today. And if the questions feel unfamiliar, that is not a criticism. That is an invitation to do exactly what this series is designed for. But before we move on, just a quick announcement. Back to this page. Yes, at the upcoming Compact Sector webinar on 16 May 2026, we will be conducting a dedicated deep dive on how to deploy international policy precedents drawn from the materials exactly like these areas in your JLE essay writing, and how to handle questions on international affairs confidently in panel interviews. Well, that session will take everything we discussed today one step further. If you're serious about the JLE 2026 cycle, that session is not optional. Details are on the ILB course platform. Register early, seats are limited. Okay, so announcement is over. Let's go back to content. As a start, I would like to introduce why minimum wage is one of the richest policy topics that you can master for JLE or for later interviews. The minimum wage and the entire legislative framework that surrounds it is one of the most analytically rich policy topics you can encounter in any interview or JLE essay, because it touches on economic policy, social protections, employer-employee relations, legislative reform, and fundamentally, the government's philosophy about how it regulates the labor market. If you treat it as a narrowly technical matter, you will miss the point entirely. And today's session is going to do something different. We're not going to read through the brief line by line. Instead, we are going to unpack the policy logic behind the numbers to understand what the government is actually trying to achieve and critically translate all of that into the kind of analysis that make an interview panel sit up and take notice. The headline figure is this. Hong Kong's statutory minimum wage rise from Hong Kong dollar 42.1 to Hong Kong dollar 43.1 per hour on the 1st of May 2026, which is a 2.38% increase. Now, if you walk into the interview, recite that figure, and stop there, you have told the panel nothing they do not already know. Any well-prepared candidate can quote a number. What they are testing is whether you understand what that number means in context. So let us ask the right question. Why 2.38%? Why not 3%? Why not 5%? Well, the answer lies in the mechanism. Since 2024 and 25, Hong Kong has moved away from the old model of ad hoc, politically negotiated reviews. It has adopted a formula-based annual review mechanism. The Minimum Wage Commission now applies a published formula incorporating two key variables. One, the Consumer Price Index, specifically CPIA, which captures inflation experienced by lower-income households, and B, the real GDP growth. This is a structural shift in how the government approaches minimum wage governance. Or instead of annual tug-of-war between labor unions and employers' associations, which generate political noise but lead to analytical credibility, the formula depoliticizes the adjustment process. It makes outcome predictable, transparent, and defensible to all parties. Here is a policy logic that you must be able to articulate, which is the state design goal is to beat inflation, not to maximize wages. Not to minimize employers' costs, but specifically to ensure that the real wages, the actual purchasing power of Hong Kong's lowest paid workers, do not erode year by year. That is a specific policy commitment, and in a year where cost of living pressures remain acute, housing, food, transport, a 2.38% uplift is not a token gesture. It is a deliberate signal about the government's direction. But there is also a secondary change that often gets overlooked. The monthly monetary gap of our record-keeping increased from 17,200 Hong Kong dollars to 17,600 Hong Kong dollars. Below this threshold, employers are legally required to maintain records of total hours worked. It is an enforcement mechanism, ensuring the minimum wage floor is verifiable. By raising the cap in line with the wages increase, the government keeps compliance net tight. So the key analytical framing for your interview is the introduction of the formula-based reviews represent a maturation of minimum wage governance, from reactive and negotiated to proactive and rule-based. That framing will resonate with any senior civil servant sitting across the table from you. So this is section 1. Next, we'll talk about section 2. It's about the 468 rule, which is a reform nobody is talking about enough. Now I want to spend significant time on what I consider the more structurally important reform in this brief, in this series, which is the 468 rules. On the 18th of January 2026, Hong Kong replaced the 041A test for continuous contracts with a new 468 rule. So let me be precise about what this means. Under the 041A test, an employee was classified as continuously employed and therefore entitled to the full range of statutory employment protections. If they work at least 18 hours per week of any 4-week period for the same employer, that is 72 hours in 4 weeks. Under the new 468 rules, the threshold dropped to 68 hours over 4 weeks, approximately 17 hours per week, a reduction of 1 hour per week, 4 hours per month. So this 1 hour per week. The single hour is the gateway to annual leave pay, to sick leave, to maternal protections, to severance pay, to long service payment, and to MPF contribution. But does that 1 hour really matter? Well, indeed, it matters enormously. The continuous contract threshold is not a technicality. It is a gateway. Cross it and you become entitled to annual pay, paid sick leave, maternity leave protection, severance pay, long service payment, and MPF contribution. Forgive me to be speaking this again. For part-time workers in catering, for example, in catering, in retail, in cleaning, in domestic services, or in gig work, these thresholds has historically been used, sometimes deliberately, to keep workers just below the statutory protections line. Employers, an industry with large part-time workforces, has strong financial initiative to schedule staff at 17 hours or fewer per week, so as to keeping them below the 418 threshold and avoiding associate costs. So now the 468 closes the gap. By moving the threshold to 68 hours over 4 weeks, still approximately 17 hours per week, the government has made it significantly harder to engineer employment schedules that strip workers of their statutory protection. The space to game the system has been compressed. So this is a targeted, this is a structural reform, not about raising wages directly, about expanding the reach of statutory framework. So it make it harder to game the system and bring more low-paid part-time workers inside the protection tent. So ask yourself, why now? Why 2026? The answer connects to a sustained policy trajectory since 2021, gradually but consistently expanding workers' protection while managing employers' concerns about competitiveness. In policy terms, this is really about managed reforms, incremental, purposeful, balanced. Being able to articulate the framing is what separates a good answer from a generally impressive one. So that is section 2 about 4668 rules. Now we come to section 3, we talk about some criminal liabilities, how to put into teeth in the law. So willful non-payment of wages practiced by some employers, including minimum wage, carries criminal liability of up to 350,000 Hong Kong dollars and 3 years imprisonment. In many legal systems, wage theft is treated as a civil matter. Any underpaid worker brings a claim, the employer repays. No custodial sentence, no criminal record. Hong Kong has chosen a different path. By criminalizing willful non-payment, the government sends an unambiguous message that is not a contractual dispute, this is a criminal act. So the word willful here is crucial. It distinguishes between an employee in genuine financial distress who cannot pay, and an employer who has the means to pay and makes a calculated decision not to. The penalty, Hong Kong dollar 350,000 and 3 years, is deliberately dissuasive. Its primary function is deterrence, not punishment after the fact. For your interview, the critical question is, does criminalization actually work? The honest answer, it depends entirely on enforcement. A law is only as strong as the willingness and capacity of the Labor Department to investigate, prosecute, and secure convictions. If enforcement is weak, even severe penalties become symbolic, and symbolic law can undermine the credibility of the legal framework itself. This is the kind of nuanced critical thinking that interview panels genuinely respect. That is session 3. Let's go to session 4. We talk about the holiday reform. Easter Monday and holiday reform. Easter Monday will become a statutory holiday in 2026 as part of the phased plan to increase statutory holidays from 12 to 17 by 2030. Hong Kong has long operated a two-tier holiday system, a lower number of statutory holidays under the Employment Ordinance and a higher number of general holidays. Workers on the statutory minimum, typically those on the low incomes employment, have historically received fewer mandated paid holidays than colleagues on the more generous contractual terms. The phased expansion represents a deliberate effort to close the gap, incrementally manage to protect small and medium enterprises from sudden shocks. The government is saying we're committed to this reform, but we will face it at a pace that business can absorb. So again, this is incremental, purposeful, and politically balanced. We're recognizing this as the government's signature approach to labor reform and articulating it is what separates a good answer from a great one. And that is session 4. About session 5, we look at the bigger analytical picture of this minimum wage reform. What is Hong Kong really doing? Let me step back and give you 300,000-foot view. When you look at all of these changes together, the changes in the previous sections, the formula-based minimum wage, the 460-day threshold, the criminal liability provisions, the phased holiday expansion, what is the government actually doing? The answer is systematically integrating low-paid and part-time workers into formal statutory framework. Hong Kong's labor market has historically featured a significant informal segment, workers in precarious and regular employment across catering, retail, cleaning, and domestic services. These workers have been exposed to wage theft, exclusions from MPF, and irregular scheduling designed specifically to circumvent continuous contract status. The reforms we have discussed today are not isolated. They form part of the coherent, deliberate policy trajectory, hardening on the floor under vulnerable workers, not by dramatic wages increases, but by expanding who is entitled to protection and making non-compliance progressively more costly. Internationally, how this was done, I said we will cover it in the 16 May Complex series, but we will also have some previews here. Hong Kong is not navigating on this issue alone. In the United Kingdom, the national living wage has seen significant uplift, and the Employment Rights Bill 2025 had just passed, proposed day one statutory entitlements, effectively eliminating the qualifying period that Hong Kong's own 418 rule previously represented. In Singapore, the progressive wage model ties wage growth to productivity improvement on a sector-by-sector basis. In South Korea, aggressive minimum wage increases in the late 2010s generated significant controversy about employment effects. A cautionary tale that Hong Kong's formula-based mechanism is implicitly designed to preempt. These international references points are not decorative additional to your essays. They are analytical anchors. They allow you to frame the Hong Kong's policy choice not as isolated local decisions, but as one government response to a global reckoning the universal tension between worker protection and economic competitiveness. So again, these international comparisons are not decorative additions to your essay. They are analytical anchors that position Hong Kong with a global reckoning. And that is exactly what distinguishes a Band 1 answer. And that is Section 5. Going to Section 6, the second last section is how to deploy these things into your JRE preparation. So let me be direct about application. In essay writing, minimum wage may appear across several question types. For example, Hong Kong economic competitiveness, social protection for vulnerable groups, the role of governments in labor markets, or questions specifically about recent policy changes. In every case, your value added is not only knowing the number. Anyone can look up to 43.1 Hong Kong dollar. Your value added is the analytical framework to understand the mechanism, the intent, the trade-offs, and the comparative context. Structure your analysis at three levels. What has changed? Give the technical facts. Then state why it changed. State the policy rationale and social context. And lastly, state what it signals, the government's broader direction and governing philosophy. Meanwhile, in interviews, demonstrate not just what the government did, but why it chose that particular approach. Formula-based rather than negotiated, criminal rather than civil, phased it up rather than immediate. Each design choice reflects a considered trade-off, and the ability to articulate that is what marks you out. So again, it's for 3.1. You see the question now. So we're back to the where we start. We have covered some of the materials today, but let me bring us back to where we started. We asked question 1 about whether you know the actual minimum wage in Hong Kong after 1st of May 2026. So, and now you should be able to respond to the questions very confidently. About the second questions, how many hours must a part-time employee work to qualify as a continuously employed? So you must now know it's 468 rules the market, not the 418 anymore. So again, it's approximately 17 hours per week, 16 hours over 4 weeks' time. Then you'll be qualified as a continuously employed contract. Policy knowledge without analytical depth is like knowing the scores of a match without understanding the game. So again, facts are the entry fee. Analysis is the price of admission to the top tier. So I hope you guys can keep reading, keep thinking, and keep preparing. And this is the preview of the Compact Sector series on 16th of May 2026. And at that session, we will introduce the minimum wage arrangements in 11 other jurisdictions, which will be helpful for you to tackle the questions during interviews about international affairs or on labor policies. It will also help you to tackle the JRE essays we cover on labor policies. So I hope I will see you at the Compact Sector webinar on the 16th May 2026. This is all about today. But until then, companions, keep going, So this last slide is about the news analyzer and consolidated bundle. And this is where our information for the compact setup webinar comes up. So if you like, if you wish to, if you want to learn more about how we structurally see policies around the globe, so you can subscribe our news analyzer and consolidated bundle, which is only less than one normal meal or dinner in Hong Kong. So that's all for today. So I hope you have a good day and see you next time in next month's report. Thank you.